Coming back, Steve.
Is it on again?
Yeah, we can do that. We don't have to sit here. We can listen to it.
Can't hear it.
Yeah, let me keep trying to.
Go ahead and this side, technical difficulties, go back up. John, take over.
Guys, I'm sorry for the technical difficulties. John Kading, can you take over now and everybody remain mute? And we will continue. Ryan?
Brian, are you there? Sorry. Looks like we lost. Is anybody from industrial still here? It looks like Shayna is
Yep.
here. Still here?
Kevin's back as well.
Kevin's back. Eric, there's Eric. Okay.
I'm here.
Sorry about that. We don't know what happened, but it's technology. So I think I don't see John Kading. Jen Kading, are you back on the call? No. All right. So we'll just switch over to Roger. You got some questions you can ask? Roger?
Yeah, I got unmuted. Can you hear me all right? Okay, you can hear me all right. Good. That's better than the last time I was here.
This is their ploy to get us to have better technology here.
I wasn't going to go there. I'm curious what carriers is industrial serving? Have there been any leases signed or anything? I mean, we hear rumors about maybe AT&T, but I think industrial basically is provides the tower and then leases out space. So I'm just wondering, is there any carriers that industrial is serving on this tower already or plan to?
Sure, I can answer that. It's a good question. So first of all, industrial is a carrier. We are providing service on the tower. We're a two-way radio. It's called Enhanced Specialized Mobile Radio, and it's a two-way radio type of network. For something that you might be able to compare it to, that's a nationwide type, or was a nationwide type of service, is the old Nextel communication. So we offer a two-way radio dispatch services, voice and data. Now, when it comes to the other major wireless national carriers, typically what happens is we get the site up and they will sign a lease and go on it then. So once the tower is constructed, we expect Verizon's a very active carrier in the network, and so is AT&T in the area, and T-Mobile is doing a lot of work. So we expect those carriers to come shortly after, but at least from the beginning, industrial will be providing their services.
Okay, so when you're talking, Kevin, when you're talking about two-way radio communication, so that's not the same thing. I don't know. That's probably not the same thing as would be with fire and rescue services.
Sorry, Roger, there was a little bit of an echo, so I didn't catch everything that you said.
No, okay, so I was just wondering, when you say that your radio communications and it's like the old Nextel, is that similar to, or is there space available for fire and rescue services to use their radio services there, since they're probably FM frequencies also?
Yeah, another great question. So what we do, Roger, when we build a tower, is we leave the top level area available for public safety. So that would be for the town of Worcester's fire in police communication systems. They usually operate on a UHF or
Yes.
VHF frequency. So we would allow them space on the tower free of charge for and allow them to use their services at the site.
Okay, so you would provide the whip antenna on the top, and they would provide the equipment down at the base to make the connection and do their repeating back and forth through mutual aid or their own dispatch and so on.
Right. They would provide, like you said, the equipment on the ground as well as the antenna. We would provide them with the free space on the tower.
Okay, thank you. John, did you want to pick back up again, or you want me to go on with another?
Why don't I continue? I'm sorry, I just got back, so
Yeah, I
I'll
think a
continue.
lot,
That's okay.
yeah, a lot
Okay,
of us got bumped.
So I was asking the question, how many businesses fall under the proposed coverage map? I was waiting for that answer, and the names and addresses of these businesses.
Okay. So John, to answer your question, I didn't get a chance to go through our coverage maps when it comes to our enhanced specialized mobile radio network. But it's a two-way radio network that, as I mentioned, it's offered voice and data. It's a regional wide network. So it's not just coverage that we provide to the residents of Worcester. It's anybody passing through Worcester and the towns that surround it.
Sure.
It consists of companies, like trucking companies, contractors, construction workers. It's basically a low-cost solution that offers, a more rugged, two-way radio experience than the cell phone. So we don't have a specific number, but we offer the services to basically anybody who travels through this area.
Gotcha. I just was curious because the proposal said that this was intended to provide coverage primarily to targeted businesses in the town. So, okay, let me move on. How many households will receive cell coverage in the town of Worcester that don't now have it? And how did you calculate the response to that?
So I don't have a calculation for the number of houses. I could come back I could get that information with you after analyzing the coverage study and basically get a rough count of homes within the town that will be covered. And again, it's also not just the people who live there, but anybody who passes through along Route 12.
Great. Yeah, it'd be great to get that information. That would be very useful. Thank you.
Sure.
And then as regards environmental impact, camouflage, et cetera, the proposal says that industrial has designed the facility to minimize impacts on natural and scenic resources. Yet the proposal talks about clearing a 22,000 square foot block of forest in a high connectivity forest block next to a highest priority wildlife crossing road, that being Norton Road, which is just across from a highest priority connectivity forest block. And in that 22,000 square feet, putting we call it 200 feet. It is 198.8. Uncamouflaged lattice tower, which extends 125 feet above the canopy of trees. Now you could say that it's hidden amongst the trees because the first 75 feet might be, but the next 125 feet is not so hidden. So I'd like to know the ways in which this minimizes impact on natural and scenic resources, and what are the methods and results of your environmental impact study, and further your aesthetic evaluation of this tower.
I'm just going to jump in here. So for those questions, Louis Hodgetts will be the one responding. He conducted both the balloon float and the photo simulations, which again, he would like to share. So if he can be given screen sharing permission, that would be great. He also oversaw the communication with the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources about impacts on natural resources. So Louis, why don't you pick it up from there?
Thank you, Brian. And just to introduce myself again, I'm Louis Hodgetts. I'm a senior project manager with Du Bois and King Engineering. I have 15 plus years of experience in the telecommunications design and permitting in Vermont. I've worked on over 100 cellular telephone towers and sites within Vermont specifically. So we were contracted by industrial to review the visual impact of the tower and the environmental resources assessment at the site. Grace Glynn, who is our field naturalist within our company, conducted a field visit, reviewed the site impacts for habitat, natural resources, wetlands, non-native invasive species, rare threatened and endangered species, bear habitat, deer habitat, bat habitat, and one other thing that's escaping me at the moment. So we reviewed the site, given its proximity to the road and to other houses and development. There was no obvious or signs of an significant environmental impact. The evaluations, or as part of the Act 248A notification process, the Agency of Natural Resources was copied and has so far not expressed any concerns of environmental impacts at this location. The only thing of note that we observed was one tree with some spalling bark that could be bat habitat for the northern long-eared bat as a roosting tree. We are very familiar with that environmental impact and have worked with the Agency of Natural Resources repeatedly to address their concerns and protect those habitat trees. We are aware that this is located on a highest priority forest block. It is on the very edge of that forest block, their existing development, which has historically through A&R been of a less concern, just given the overall impacts to the forest block, given the houses in the vicinity. As we continue to work through this process, we do expect written comments and more formal comments and field evaluations from the Agency of Natural Resources, which we will continue to work through. But at this time, we do not anticipate any environmental impacts that they would be concerned with. And then on the second part of your question, which was the visual impacts, I am not able to share my screen yet, so if someone could. Give me
Yeah,
access.
we're working on that. Louis.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, it says that again.
Can you do it now?
Yes.
Okay. And yeah, okay, never mind. Go ahead, Louis.
Sorry. Slip. Okay,
Oh, geez, we're gonna do.
so as part of our visual assessment analysis, we do a couple different things. Initially, we run a computer simulation based on the projected tower height at the tower coordinates using a digital terrain model. We project the visibility of the tower based on the overall terrain. And then we also project it based on a digital surface model, which accounts for the vegetations, structures, and any obstructions that have been mapped through a LiDAR digital elevation model that's available from the Vermont Center for Geographic Information. So that information is overlaid on a map as it's shown here. The yellow area is the areas that could see the top of the tower based on just elevation alone. This is assuming that no trees obstruct the view at all, no buildings obstruct the view. This is purely a terrain-based model where you could see the tower from is mapped out in yellow. For these tower simulations, we typically use a 1 mile and 2 mile buffer. Outside of 1 mile, it becomes really difficult to spot the tower. And then outside of 2 miles, it's almost impossible to spot the tower unless it's on a ridge line, completely backdropped. So we don't generally explore much beyond 2 miles just because it is usually inconsequential views at that point. So the purple that we're showing on this map is based a visual projection based on the vegetation and building obstructions. As we zoom in, we'll note that there are some areas on Route 12, this area in particular, where there are views of the tower. However, the vast majority of Route 12, up until you get into the village center, there's no real view based on this projected map. And then as you are up at the tower site, there's some views, especially in the wide open areas that do have views of the tower. So we identified key areas that needed some investigation, some further investigation. So we conducted a balloon float. I believe it was mid-January, where we tethered 2 large diameter, 3-foot diameter balloons to a 195-foot long string. So the top balloon's at 195, the lower balloon's at 185 feet. That was tethered at the tower location and extended up into the air. And we drove around all the local roads within Worcester, focusing primarily on areas where we knew the tower was going to be visible, but also stopping at intermediate areas just to confirm that our projected map was accurate and that the views would be either obstructed or minimal. So these views in green, views 1, 2, 3, and 4, these are locations where the balloons were visible, which corresponded well with our map. And the remaining views 5 through 14, were completely obstructed, where existing ground vegetation or existing buildings limited the view of the tower so that it's not visible from these vantage points. We then,
Hey, Chris, sorry, I mean, Louis, I'm sorry to interrupt, but before you leave that map, I saw your presentation when you gave it to the Regional Planning Commission. But the number 4, where you took the photo, right to the south of number 4, that clearing, all that purple, that's the, that is kind of like the entryway to the Ellis Bruce Trail. So just to confirm, so that purple there is showing that if you're standing in that meadow, which is the opening for the Ellis Bruce Trail, you'd have a really good view of the tower. Is that correct?
so unfortunately, when we were doing this, we did not realize that the Ellis Brook Trail existed. I'm a resident of Huntington. I am not a resident of Worcester, so I am not familiar with this trail that was installed not too long ago, as far as I understand.
Right. But that's what that purple is showing, correct?
So yes,
Okay.
what this purple is showing is that there are parts of the tower that will be visible, which I believe that the trailhead, or where the trail enters the wood line, is approximately at this southeast corner of the clearing.
Yeah, around there, yeah.
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 So there is a view within that clearing. Obviously, as you get closer to the tower, the trees in the foreground do provide some screening. Depending on where you're standing, you could probably see the tower in some of these spots, depending on whether there are leaves on the trees or not. So yes, there is a view of the tower from where the trail exits the wood line. I do not know the extent of that because we didn't take a photo from that area and we didn't specifically observe it. So I can't tell you if it's the top 10 feet of the tower, or the top 50 feet of the tower. So we do realize that that is a very important part for the town, and we are looking to do some follow-up investigation to understand the visibility of the tower from that location.
Oh, that's great. I'm hoping that you guys will keep us abreast of that. Like that further investigation, the town would be very interested in what that investigation is.
Yeah, I intend to get out there myself and go to the head of the trail and see what the view is and where, and we may be able to conduct another simulation without the balloon float, and I'll explain how we would do that. But I can speak to that more later.
Okay.
Great.
John, do you want to?
Okay. I can move on to my next question. So we keep this thing moving.
Go ahead, John.
Okay. So thank you for that map and that I'm going to move on to health issues. I'd like to know what criteria did you use for assessing the health safety of this project?
That question will be answered by Kevin.
Hi, John. Yeah, so we plan on submitting a study done by an RF specialist, a radiation specialist, and it will take into account all the equipment that is proposed for the tower. So it'll take into account our two-way radio system. It'll take into account every possible carrier who could co-locate on the tower and any other potential equipment from public safety from the town. And it will generate a study that will show exactly the impact that it will have. I've seen hundreds, if not thousands of these studies in the past. It's something that's the levels are something that are regulated by the FCC, and they allow a certain maximum permissible exposure level from 0 to 100%. Anything above 100% is a problem. And when you're talking about numbers that high, it usually has to do with a broadcast tower that has a TV antenna or an FM antenna located on it. When it comes to cellular carriers and wireless carriers, it's much lower power. And typically the maximum permissible exposure limit is somewhere between 1 and 2% of what's allowed. So it's very low and it is safe.
And it is safe by the standards set by the 1996 Federal Telecommunications Act?
It's an FCC standard. It may mention some of it in the Telecom Act of 96, but they've been updating those numbers every so many years. And I know it was just updated recently. So it's a current standard.
And these numbers have to do with heat generation. Is that the primary endpoint?
I really would not be the one to answer that question. I think the study would be able to answer all your questions, and I'd feel more comfortable once we have that getting it into your hands so you could review it. And then if you have any more questions, I could make the person available who produced the study to answer it for you.
Okay, these studies seem to me to be, a little out of date, or the studies that these things are based on. I think there's sort of a common sense test about is it safe to be at the base of a cell phone tower? And I think the common sense test is, which of us would want to live 300 feet from the base of this tower? I guess those are the questions that I have. I think, Roger, you have some more questions?
Yeah, if I didn't mute myself, I guess I'm all right. I didn't know if Tony wanted to jump in at some point, and if Tony does, please let me know. I'm curious about who holds the liability on the tower. Is it industrial themselves? Is it the landowner? And I guess also, as far as the leases are concerned, does that include any kind of health coverage as well?
Yeah, I could answer that for you, Roger. We
Okay.
do hold the insurance. Industrial was responsible for that insurance, and it covers everything around the tower. It has the property owner on it. And anybody who leases space on the tower would also have to provide liability insurance. So
Okay.
The major carriers would have their own liability insurance.
Okay. Now, sooner or later, what goes up must come down. Are there plans for the future on paying for dismantlement of the tower if it ever becomes decommissioned?
I've been doing this for 30 years and I've never seen one come down. So, it costs a lot of money to build these sites, and it's not something we would build if they were not needed or required anymore. But if for some reason it was no longer used, then we would take it down. That would be our responsibility.
Okay. Being an old radio broadcaster, I know towers need to be serviced. And who will be servicing the tower? And I'm kind of curious where these service providers are located.
Yeah, so we're a very unique company as opposed to a lot of the other tower companies that happen to be out there. We're a regional company. We're in New England, and no one works on our towers except us.
Okay.
We have our own crews when it comes to concrete. pouring the foundation, actually constructing the tower, raising the steel, putting the antennas up. We have our own electricians and master electricians who wire them. So we're responsible and we do everything in-house. And because of that, we take pride of it. There's no contractors going in and out that, we don't know who they are. So we have people who work out of both our Massachusetts office here as well as our New Hampshire office that would service the facility.
Okay. On a quick side note, obviously, the closer that when you put a tower in, the closer you can be to a servicing road and to power lines and so on, that's beneficial to you. But is there kind of a limit where you really just say, that's not affordable to go that far out or that far up and so on to put a tower in?
It's a good question. Yes, there is a point where it's just economically not feasible to do anymore. I mean, you'd love to put a tower a good distance away from everybody, but to run the utilities, run the lines, make the access driveway passable, there does come a point where it's just not economical to build it anymore.
Okay, and to follow up with that, have you ever had a case of where maybe the landowner or the town has been willing to cooperate and just say, well, if we're 100 feet further than what you can really afford to go, how about if we take care of the last 100 feet, et cetera, et cetera? Has that ever happened before?
No, I've never had that happen before. Sounds nice though.
Well, maybe it's a pipe dream, but you never know until you ask. So I'm just thinking, in other words, if there were an alternative site that was maybe just beyond your limit, your comfort zone, or your profit margin, if it was just beyond that, what would happen if you came back and talked to the town or the landowner and said, that last 100 feet, we just can't bite that bullet for that? I would offer that as a suggestion, because there may be towns that just go, we're willing to help you out to get it that extra 100 feet out and away from town and so on and so forth, but still with good coverage. I know there's already been some towns that have said that they pay the landowner to not have a tower put up. So I was thinking on the other side of the coin.
Yeah,
I'll
well,
be good.
thanks for that. That's good to know. Appreciate it.
I mean, you never know until you ask.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many variables. It's hard to say. We
Sure.
have to look at the location and see exactly what's involved. I mean, typically it's more than 100 feet that would make or break a site.
Yeah, but unless the last 100 feet or 50, 200-foot vertical. But anyway, Tony, did you have some questions?
Thanks, Roger. I'm sorry I had technical difficulties early on. I just wanted to ask about when you said that some of the co-locations were impossible to get to. So what does impossible mean in Vermont? There's probably people on this call who live in houses on top of a hill that look pretty impossible to get to, yet somehow there's a road that gets there. So is that really physically impossible problem, or is it a cost problem?
It all depends, but it has to do with environmental. Is it crossing a river, or is there a stream? Is there wetlands involved? Those are things that you can't just do. You have to get permission, and there's a lot of things involved with that. We looked at each of these properties that were mentioned, the alternative site analysis, very closely. Maybe if it's too steep, we have to get heavy machinery, we have to get trucks, we have to get concrete trucks up there and crane trucks. So it has to be built in a safe manner so we're able to get those vehicles access to it. So those are all deciding factors on if it's buildable or not.
Thanks. And the other thing I wanted to ask about is, thank you for noting that Worcester has historical buildings in the village, but the proposed tower actually lurks over the village in its proposed state and breaks that ridge line. And you may or may not be aware that Worcester has applied or is in the process of applying for historic village designation at the national level. And it's hard to believe that a 200-foot tower lurking over the village is going to support that cause. So I wondered how you actually address the historical question.
I think that's one that we will chime in on.
Yes, I can answer that. We have contracted with a sub-consultant, EBI. And unfortunately, I can't remember what their initials stand for off the top of my head. They conduct historic reviews, archaeological reviews across the country for telecommunication facilities. They are in the process of completing their report, waiting on just some final information before they can submit it to the State Historic Preservation Office. Their initial evaluation has shown that there's no impact. However, that does have to get reviewed by the State Historic Preservation Office, and then they weigh in. If they feel that there is an impact, that report has not been submitted to the State Historic Preservation Office yet, but it is in the queue to be submitted in the very near future. Furthermore, the views from the town, as Kevin was alluding to earlier, are limited or reduced because of an intervening ridgeline that's located between the tower site and the village center. That intervening ridgeline and the trees that are atop it really restrict the views up to the uppermost portion of the tower. So you can only most of the even higher areas within the village proper, only the very topmost part of the tower and the whip antennas are visible. And at a distance of about a mile from the tower site, it'll be very difficult to discern the antennas and the tower through the trees in the foreground.
Thank you.
Do you have any more questions there, Tony?
That's it.
All right, so there's just one request I have. Is it possible to get those alternate site maps and propagation maps? Would it be possible to have those digital images emailed to the town?
Yes, we can certainly do that. We may have to use a file sharing program like Dropbox because they may be too large to attach to emails, but yes, we can get it to the town.
Okay, and the other thing is, I guess this would be directed at Kevin, but when the map is showing the coverage map, there's a color that's going over a topographical map, and that topography has peaks and valleys. How does that cell coverage penetrate into those valleys and crevices?
Sure, it's so wireless coverage, specifically with the carriers, with the higher the frequency, the less it penetrates through things like pine trees and buildings and terrain. So the lower the frequency, in the 800, 900 megahertz range, it penetrates a little better. But when you get up to 1900 and 2300 megahertz, which a lot of the carriers are going to, because that's the spectrum that's available now for them to use, it's hugely impacted, and it's very much a line of sight technology. So if you were to build a tower that was within the trees, it would be very ineffective or not usable at all. It just, it doesn't penetrate enough. If you were somewhere near the site on the other side of some trees, it would work. But as you get horizontally away from the location, the coverage diminishes quickly, especially in an area like Vermont, where there's so many pine trees.
So like, because the map, it shows, the one that you showed, it showed that it, the village is pretty unobstructed. But then it's showing the hillsides around there, which have a lot of trees. And then there's a lot of our roads are heading up Brooks. And a lot of the roads are behind the hills that are showing. So are those places going to get coverage? How do we know if they'll get coverage?
I think if you take a closer look at the map, when we send it to you, it'll show you exactly where it won't get coverage. It's kind of hard for me to answer when I'm not sure specifically about where you mean. But a lot of it has to do with that ridge line that we're not on the top of. We're off of it a little bit. So the lower we go down in elevation on the tower, the more we're obstructed by those trees and the actual ridge line itself. And that's why it won't get to areas of the village if it's shortened.
Okay, and then did industrial at all consider two shorter towers on either side of town?
It still is going to have the same issue if you're talking about two shorter towers as being towers that are 20 feet above the average tree line. The map shows that won't cover anything. It won't cover enough area of even half the town or even a quarter of the town. So we really, and it becomes a cost thing too. I mean, we're not a company with unlimited resources where we can build multiple towers all over town. I mean, Worcester, it is a smaller populated area, and so we can't justify building 3, 4, 5 sites to cover what one site would.
Okay, and then did you guys on the location map, did you guys consider Gould Hill Farm location?
Yes, yep, it was on the map.
Okay,
And so that site would provide coverage to the area. It would work quite nicely. It would be more visible because it's higher in elevation and it's on top of that ridge line.
so is that why it wasn't chosen?
That's why we didn't choose it, yeah.
Okay, because of the visibility only?
Because it would be a more visible site and the area that it would work, it's the property has a bunch of structures in an open field area, and it would be very visible. It'd be within, very close to those structures and houses with no trees, blocking it, or no trees to act as a buffer, if you will. So it would be more visible from the town and Route 12, as well as whoever owns that property.
So it would be close to someone's property, is that what you just said?
Close to structures that are right on the property with no trees as a buffer.
Okay. All right. So the Select Board and the Planning Commission do not have any more questions. We do have a couple of time. We do have some time left where we can open it up to public comment. I would like to point out that I do believe we do have some members here from the Department of Public Service, and I just want to thank them for being here.
Thank you, and we do. I'm Jim Porter, one of the lawyers. We've got 2 other lawyers here and our telecommunications director, and we can also tell you a little bit about what we do in the process and answer any questions that anybody might have.
Okay. Somebody did, Jim, somebody did ask, or they made the comment that the application itself doesn't have a lot of detail. And is it possible for the department to require more detail in these applications, so it isn't incumbent upon the towns to get this detail?
Well, to be clear, the once the actual petition has been filed, the statute requires more detail in that filing. One thing, and I think it was Chris Owen who had asked this, or somebody else earlier did, the Agency of Natural Resources and the Department of Public Service will both be parties to this proceeding once it gets filed. And we'll both, take a position and make a recommendation to the Public Utility Commission as to whether it's in the public good and that everything's been met to approve this project. A&R will look at the natural environment piece, and to answer Chris Owen's question, the department will be retaining independent experts. One for sure will be an aesthetics expert. And one thing we gather from these kind of meetings is just input from the community, which really helps us in our ultimate recommendation to the PUC. And regarding aesthetics, if there are any areas of particular note that you would like for our expert to look at the view from, you should let us know that or make a list, which would be helpful.
All right. That's good to know. Great. So we're going to open it up now if anybody for public comment or questions. So now's your chance. Go ahead and raise your hand. If you don't know how to raise your hand, it's on the bottom bar there in reactions, and you just raise your hand. You can get to pick the color of your hand and everything. Looks like Ava has a question. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Ava.
Hi there. This is my first time being here, and I came here a little bit late because I had a class. I am kind of concerned about the environmental impact statement, or I don't even know if there was an environmental impact statement. I just heard there was only consideration of 2 different species, and that seems very ridiculous because there's, ecosystems work together. I'm also just curious as to, given that we have such a small town, what is the reasoning behind having such a large tower, and where is this electricity going to? I know that I think Governor Scott tried to get like 100 towers out to rural communities, but I'm concerned that it seems like most of the town doesn't really feel like this is something we want. So that's that.
Ava, I can answer some of that for you. The telecommunications, the town, the planning commission, we all feel like there's an importance to have cell coverage in town, if not for anything, but to access 911. And it's also pretty important for the state. It's kind of front and center. So what we do not like, the town and the planning commission, is really the whole process on how this has come about, and the fact that we just don't like the process. And it seems like the state should establish guidelines for getting telecommunications, and they should give towns the opportunity to adopt those guidelines and set up a plan to get those telecommunications into the town, and give the towns the priority and the authority to make the process, to get the process rolling, as opposed to having an outside company come in and say, this is what we want to do. And then we have to respond legally. We're just involved after the fact. We're involved during this whole process. So I don't know if that answers all your questions, but it would be cell coverage, and I think other stuff, maybe somebody from industrial can talk about that.
Okay, thank you.
Steve, did you have a question or were you just thumbs up?
No, I did. I think I just want to repeat the comment I made in the chat room, which is, will industrial, as a show of good faith and transparency, fly another tower high balloon at the proposed site? I've seen the slideshow and the photos, but they're selective and less than complete. And I'd like to see something instead of 7 points of view chosen by industrial.
I could answer that. We're prepared to fly another balloon test, and we'll notify the town when that happens. So as was mentioned before, if the town has some specific areas they would like to see the balloon results, the photo analysis done from, we'd be happy to look at those areas.
Okay.
Looks like we've got Chris Owen, Kyle, Devitt.
Go ahead and go, Chris.
Good. Actually, a question, please, for Mr. Delaney, and a brief remark. One is, can you describe how Industrial Tower chooses between a lattice, a monopine, or a monopole tower, what its considerations are? And then a brief editorial remark, and separately, given the governor's initiative to spend $50 million on 100 towers around Vermont in concept, could Worcester be used as the poster person for how the applicant could cooperate with the community to reach a good result for coverage, aesthetics, and health purposes? Thank you.
So sure, I'd be happy to answer the first part of that question. We chose a lattice tower because we think they're the least visually intrusive because you can see through them. They're not a solid structure, but instead they have 3 legs and lattice, so it blends in better to the background. You know, we've used monopoles before, and we're not objecting to using a monopole, but we feel that the lattice is visually a better choice. With regard to monopines, you can disguise a tower to look like a tree, and you're never going to fool anybody that it's a tower. We found that they bring more attention to themselves than a regular tower would, just because of the nature of them. You know, 185-foot pine tree with antennas on the top of it, you wouldn't be fooling anybody, and we think they look worse than an actual lattice tower or monopole tower.
Kyle, you're next.
Thanks, Ted. I'm just curious if any of the people from the organization proposing this tower are willing to share the estimated cost of the entire installation as a reference for if we were to take it upon ourselves to provide cell coverage in our own town.
It's not something we typically share. I mean, there's so many layers of cost. There's the construction cost, there's the cost of getting it permitted, going through this process, the soft costs. There's no one site that has a number. Every site is very unique depending on the building.
Well, you must have done the cost estimations or you wouldn't be making a proposal.
Yeah, that's not something that we share.
Why not?
It's just part of our business, the business plan, and it's respectfully something that we don't share.
Okay, Brooke.
Thank you. My name is Brooke Dingledine. I'm a land use and energy attorney who's been practicing in Vermont for 26 years. And I represent 3 of the abutting landowners to the proposed project site. And I have been working with towns and abutters in the Public Utility Commission's arena for about 4 years now. Has very similar legal standards to Act 250, which I've been doing my entire career. And I got involved initially with some folks in Bennington who were impacted by PFOAs, and then had 2 large solar arrays proposed for their neighborhood. And the litigation has ensued for 7 to 10 years now, the fight down there over these 2 sites, which violate the town plan. And we finally have gotten that kind of ruling from the Supreme Court. They have said your town plan says this is not a place you can put this project. And the question now is, will the Public Utility Commission exercise discretion to trump the town plan and disregard it? So the reason why I bring that up is that, first of all, it's really important for the town to defend their town plan and their siting ordinance for cell towers. Section 248A is the fast track way to get a permit for a tower in this state, instead of going through zoning or an ordinance like you folks have, and Act 250 on towers over 50 feet in height. So the town, instead of in Act 250 where they look at the town and regional plans as a criteria, here they give the town a voice. And their recommendation is given substantial deference in terms of what their protections in their town plans say, and also what a siting ordinance for a cell tower such as you have requires. Now, when that process is gone through, I commend you for collecting public input on this. But the reason why you see a tower company coming in and violating those provisions in your town plan and disregarding the protections of your town plan and your siting ordinance is because technically the Public Utility Commission can trump it. They can disregard your law. And that's a lot easier to disregard because there's explicit authority to do that if the Public Utility Commission deems that the siting of this tower in this location is in the public good. So does the public good outweigh the protections that the town of Worcester has put in to make sure that a tower like this doesn't get sited in places like right next to somebody's home? So it's very important that you defend the language in that town plan, because the Supreme Court has also told us recently in the Apple Hill cases that if a town does not consistently defend and interpret consistently their town plan protections, that they can become meaningless, because if they are arbitrary and capriciously applied, they no longer constitute a clear written community standard that protects the town. So that's why this process is so important, and I am really excited to see a town take so much time and effort. Let me just move on to a couple things, and that what I want to talk about is what you've heard tonight about the height of this tower. And you know, you have a provision that requires the height of the tower to be no taller than 10 feet over the surrounding canopy. And what we've heard is some mathematical calculations about how this is basically, with the tree height, et cetera, we're talking about the height of the tower needing to be 1,245 feet. And we also heard that there's 20 feet of vertical space required for a 2-way radio, which is the only equipment at this point in time that is proposed for this actual tower. So the funny thing is, so this ultimate height of 1245, if you put this tower higher up in the back of the property, the subject property, you could get much more height and you could shorten the height of the tower. But the problem is that industrial doesn't want to shorten the height of the tower. They want to put it in a place where they can maximize the visible space of the actual tower. They don't want trees around it. And if they do have trees around it, they want it, 100 and whatever feet above the canopy so that they can then go to sell companies and attract other people. But the problem is that this whole proposal doesn't have those leases. And unlike a company like AT&T that, for example, is proposing a tower right now in Chelsea, what you saw were photo simulations from many areas. They were all shared ahead of time. They were presented. You had coverage maps. You had a very professional presentation. Here, it's spotty. And what I want to talk about lastly is we have endeavored to try to work cooperatively to, in fact, request that we get the photo simulations ahead of time. We get the coverage maps ahead of time. And Council for Industrial has refused those requests. Even like a day before, the other day when I showed up at the Regional Planning Commission, when they said, no, we won't give you photo simulations. And then the very next day, they're presenting photo simulations that obviously have already been made. The balloon tests were done, the photos were done. The towers were interposed on the photographs that were taken to demonstrate what the simulated view would look like. And yet they wouldn't share that information. And we saw the dog and pony show over at the Regional Planning Commission, and they trotted out the photo simulations. So here tonight, they still have refused to give us propagation maps, coverage studies. And tonight they trotted that out to you on a screen that nobody can see. I have two screens in my office here. And I was squinting, I was trying to read it because they threw it on us tonight instead of presenting that ahead of time so people could look at it. And in fact, I intend to send that to an expert to review. But the problem is that they're playing hide the ball. And this is not the type of community engagement that is expected by the Public Utility Commission. And the reason why we know that is Apple Hill Solar. There was an effort to transfer these standard offer contracts to a different location. And the upshot of that effort was basically for the Public Utility Commission to say, no, we're not going to let you start over after all this time because you blew it in the beginning. You did not engage the community. You did not work with them to find out what the restrictions of the town plan were. You didn't respect the town plan. This process that was gone through and is expected to be gone through didn't happen. It was only after years of litigation that then you tried to settle with people. And that's not what is expected. And although this is on a smaller scale and it's not a standard offer contract, it's deja vu all over again in terms of me trying to help abutting landowners have a say in this process, make sure that the town position and opinion is respected, not only through the process, but we shouldn't be in the process until the developers work with the town. You are, the effort here to try to invite them to the table is significant, and we still stand with that offer in hand. But the problem is that what we've heard tonight is a bunch of, this wasn't convenient, that site didn't work because, gosh, we would have had to build a road longer than, the teeny little road we have to for the site that we picked. And the other thing that I would also suggest is, because I don't know if I can share my screen easily enough, but this site where we were shown how there were no alternative sites in the rear part of the actual parcel at issue. And we talked about how, oh gosh, we can't go over their driveway and they have a septic tank and a well. And even though there was no physical barrier to going in that direction in terms of slope or et cetera, gee, we might have to drill a well for them somewhere else for $15,000. I mean, that's the kind of impediment that is hard to justify. All these other sites, everything was just too expensive, apparently, or inconvenient. So they went for the low hanging fruit. If you look at that site plan, why not go up the driveway you're proposing, get to the site you're proposing, instead of making it a site, turn left and drive up to the site that way. You don't have to go straight up the hill all the way straight up. Go up, turn left, and go across the ridge, which is the way that the roads are suggested anyway, to follow the contours of the slope. That's how you could get back up in there. But it's an issue of cost. It's an issue of inconvenience. And because town plans are not absolute and the protections that you place in there are varied between towns, it is the Achilles heel that the developers attack in order to get the approvals that they want, because the town plan can be disregarded. So I would again suggest, Mr. Sullivan, that certainly my clients, and it sounds like many of the townspeople, are interested in working with you. We would ask you to abandon this site and consider working with us. Maybe some of these alternate sites are not as impossible as one might think. And certainly with $52 million to support the development of 100 towers around the state, certainly my dealings with AT&T, I understand that there is a lot of money available for the actual development of these towers where it's not coming out of the developer's pocket. So we would be very interested to know what kind of financial support that would be provided by ultimately the tax dollars here, and what kind of benefit would be bestowed upon folks that are saying something's impossible because it might not cost too much, or our profit margin might not be large enough. So thank you very much for the opportunity to address you. And again, Mr. Sullivan, we stand ready to sit down, work out, look at maps, work with your engineer to talk about these other areas at maybe a little higher elevation, reduce the height of the tower, and find a spot that is not looming over someone's home, which is just unacceptable to this community. Thank you.
Tony, you're next.
Yes, yes. Hi, I wanted to ask whether or not there are additional environmental and other standards that apply if you're seeking to build a tower that's 200 feet, and why you decided at 198.7 or whatever it is. Was it just to skirt that regulation?
Yeah, sure. I could answer that. I don't know if Brian was going to. But just to clarify, the tower is 185 feet. So the tower itself is 185 feet. And then there's whip antennas that are 13 feet in length that go above the top of the tower to the 198 feet. The only thing in addition that would need to be done if the tower were over 200 feet was it would need to be marked, which means it would be painted and lit, which means it would have a red light on it at night, or strobe lights during the day. And that's the only addition that would be required if it went above 200 feet.
Kevin, can you tell me what the coverage objective is?
Yes, it's the town of Worcester, and to the north of town of Worcester, it's Route 12. And for the carriers, it would be also Route 12 in the village area.
So the town of Worcester, Route 12.
Yeah.
And that's
in the
it?
area, it's north to connect to our coverage from the north. To make
Area
it
north.
seamless.
Okay. North to connect. All right. We have another hand. Catherine, go ahead. Catherine, you're up. Can you ask her to unmute?
I am.
maybe she walked away. Oh. Okay, well, it doesn't seem like there's any more hands up. And what I would like to do is thank everybody for
Hey,
coming out.
Ted.
Yeah,
Hi, this is Ron.
yeah, go ahead, Ron.
Hey, listen, you know, in East Montpelier, last year, AT&T sent letters around to just about every landowner to see if they were interested in hosting a tower. And it turned out that only one resident in the area was interested, and that's where they focused their tower siting. In this presentation, there are a half a dozen or so properties that were considered, like the Adair property and Kading property and others. But how many other, in the entire town of Worcester, how many other sites were suitable where landowners were not interested? In other words, is there only one site in the entire town of Worcester that's suitable for a cell tower?
Kevin, can you field that question?
Yeah, sure. So we did not send letters to those properties that I reviewed just because that they wouldn't work for one reason or the other. So there was no need to send a letter to them. The property that we did choose, we found a landowner who was interested, and so we worked with them.
Right, but were there other properties that you were interested where landowners turned you down?
No.
So there's only one site that your engineering team identified within the entire town that's suitable for this tower. And that one site, there was a willing property owner who said yes. Is that correct?
That meets the coverage objective, yes.
Wow.
Kate, go ahead.
Hi. So I am speaking as a business owner on the general Gould Hill area at the end of Duger Road. And I am, because this project has been specified as like primarily servicing or serving business owners, I'm also curious about why the actual business owners in Worcester, because Worcester's doesn't have a huge number of businesses, but why business owners weren't consulted. I personally am in a spot where we have cell service, although on this, the maps that were shown of cell service, it shows that we don't, although we do. So yeah, it just makes me curious to think, like, how did you identify? I know you've gone over that you have identified different parcels, but it seems lacking to have said we're going to primarily serve business owners in a town that doesn't have a lot of businesses and then not reach out to those businesses. So I personally don't understand how I, as a business owner, would benefit from this tower at the moment. And I know you've said two-way radios, but again, that doesn't give me much information as how I would benefit as a business owner in Worcester that would get the potential coverage.
Sorry. Again, just to clarify, it's regional coverage. It will provide coverage to the town of Worcester and then go up to Elmore and then connect to our other sites to the north. So it's not just the town of Worcester, it's regional coverage to the entire region that we're looking to provide coverage to. So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
I guess I'm still not clear on how two-way radios will specifically be helpful to local businesses. That's what I'm not clear about. I can understand cell service, but what you're proposing, as has been said previously, like right now you don't actually have leases for cell carriers. So I don't know what your service specifically does for businesses that are not using, unless you're using a two-way radio all the time?
Right, so we would be providing the services to people like plow companies in the winter who do your plow services, trucking companies who would be driving through along Route 12, plumbing contractors, builders. That is the type of business and commercial operations that we target.
Do you know how many truckers go through Route 12? I personally don't see truckers on Route 12. So I'm just curious about like, what is the background between identifying who your customers are and where they are, and then how you can meet them, because as any business owner knows, like you have to understand where your ideal customers are. It doesn't seem like Worcester has a lot of those ideal customers, unless it's just like skipping up to get to Morrisville or Elmore. And yeah, so it just feels still a little vague to me.
Again, it's a regional plan, so we're providing coverage eventually to, our goal is to provide coverage to the entire state of Vermont. We're starting in the Burlington area and working our way south. So this is part of many pieces that will be many sites that we're looking to put together.
Catherine?
Can you hear us? Can you hear us?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
This is Jerry McKenzie. I find it interesting that it's our tax dollars paying for this. It's not like their corporations are bidding on anything. And to me, it's kind of like, you know, if everybody wants to ride a bike, they'll put a bike path in for you. Also, everybody has in this town has the option of a landline. And the other thing that concerns me is Jim Wood's house. Seems to me if that was near my house, I'd want my taxes reduced considerably. And I agree with everyone that there's been very little information actually beforehand for us to be able to even consider other places. My brother was also one of those people over on this side of the mountain who received one of those letters of proposal. So I find it very interesting that our tax dollars paying, that's our tax dollars paying for this. And yet we still pay for the coverage afterwards, if in fact anybody gets it. Because I don't believe it'll go into some of the places where people were concerned about, such as the valleys, nooks and crannies that I can see on your map that it just does not reach. And I certainly don't want to look at it at all. From my place, I can see, I'm looking right at it. And I can just picture seeing this light on top of it all night long that I get to look at. And I guess that's my comments for now.
Okay, thank you. Brooke, another question, comment?
Thank you, Ted. Can I just ask Kevin, how many, I don't remember from seeing that map, how many alternate sites were investigated that he demonstrated around the area?
We went through 10 sites.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
10 sites?
10 sites? Okay.
Correct, yeah.
So Kevin, is it fair to say that those 10 sites were identified because they did achieve the coverage objective in terms of the location, correct?
Five of the sites provided coverage to the coverage objective, and then 5 did not.
So the computer models gave you 5 potentials and 5 that they shouldn't have identified?
No, in our review of sites in and around town, 5 of those sites worked, and then 5 that were presented by our site acquisition specialist as potential sites that he thought could potentially work, did not for coverage.
Okay, and that coverage objective was, as you indicated, the town and the state highway to the north, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so there were at least 5 other sites to follow up on Ron's point. There were 5 alternative sites besides the one that you actually chose and contacted the landowner that could have achieved the coverage objective, but were ruled out because of expense
Or environmental reasons.
or concerns that A&R wasn't going to give you a wetlands permit or a stream crossing permit, or you might have to build a bridge that was too expensive for what you wanted to spend. Fair to say?
Part of that is correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate your candor.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Our meeting's gonna run out of time. So I just want to take the opportunity to thank everybody for coming out. Thank you for the Department of Public Service for being here. Avram, thank you for being here. Industrial, thank you for showing up. Brian, thank you for showing up. Joseph, and Brooke, and everybody from the awesome town of Worcester. We love this place and we want to see it taken care of. And we want anybody who does business here to make sure that they're taking care of us. So we look forward to hearing from Industrial about setting up some balloons and taking some pictures from places that we think are important. With that, we're going to sign off and see y'all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so
Everyone's still hanging in there.
All right.